Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Corn and soybean harvest moving along at full speed for many of us, so glad you could take some time to join us this week. Kicking off today's show, a new study released earlier this month by UNL shows the state's ag economy remains strong in spite of recent hardships. The 2017 Economic Impact of the Nebraska Agricultural Production Complex report found that agriculture accounts for nearly 34% of business sales, 22% of the gross state product, and nearly a quarter of the state's jobs. If you're wondering why the year 2017 is in the title of a report that came out this month, it's because the report uses data from the most recent Census of Agriculture in 2017. Eric Thompson, one of the report's authors, joined me on the show to break down some of the numbers.
Well, one of the things we found, even though 2017 was a year for a year of poor commodity prices in agriculture and modest farm incomes, we continued to find that the agricultural production complex accounted for almost 1/4 of Nebraska's economy. So depending on the measure, we found between 1/5 and 1/4 of Nebraska gross state product, employment, or income was related to this agricultural production complex.
And another thing you and the other authors on the report did is take 8 different regions of the state and examine the economic impacts of these sub-state regions. So what are some of the major takeaways you'd want people to learn from that?
Well, as people might expect, in terms of the share of the economy, the largest impacts were outside of the East region, which included Lincoln and Omaha, which also included Grand Island. It had the largest agricultural industry. However, it was about 11% of the economy in that urban region. In the other parts of the state, the agricultural production complex tended to account for a much larger share of the economy, from about 20% in southwest Nebraska and the Nebraska Panhandle, up to 40 to 45% in northeast and southeast Nebraska. So we did find some variety in non-metropolitan Nebraska, but certainly the agricultural production complex is the leading industry in those parts of the state, as well as one of the leading industries in the Omaha and Lincoln area.
Eric, seems like we can't do an interview these days without bringing in the pandemic one way or another. Would you say that Nebraska's reliance on agriculture has in some ways helped the state when it comes to the economic impacts of COVID?
Yes, Nebraska's a focus on agricultural production, since that's an essential industry. Often there's obviously important exceptions such as meat processing plants, but it's often an industry where production can occur with people not standing next to each other. Sort of the work is naturally socially distant in a lot of cases. So because of that, Nebraska's economy, while certainly impacted by the COVID-19 recession, hasn't been impacted as severely, particularly if you compare us to states with industries that are most impacted, like tourism states or states with large, for whatever reason, large sit-down restaurant industries and so forth.
And finally, let's look to the future. What do you see for Nebraska's agricultural production complex moving forward?
I think there were a couple key findings. The first is that between 2010 and 2017, the last 2 reports, we found that the Nebraska's agricultural production complex continued to grow. It maybe grew a little more slowly than the overall economy, but it continued to grow steadily. And we anticipate that in the future, Nebraska's agricultural sector will continue to grow and continue to be a key part of our state's economy. I think the other lesson learned is that while the incomes of agricultural producers are certainly very important, the other key factor for the agricultural sector is production. So there's so much employment related to ag production that even when farm incomes are modest, because we have such a high level of production in Nebraska, it makes agriculture a key to our economy in good ag years and bad ag years alike.
The other authors on the report include UNL ag economists Brad Lubin and Jeffrey Stokes. On the Market Journal website, you'll find a link where you can check out the full report. And we've also posted a webinar where the authors go a little more in depth on their research. Moving on, and the window is closing in many parts of the state for late alfalfa harvest, but it seems that window may be open a bit longer for some in southeast Nebraska. Market Journal's Bill Dodd spoke with Extension educator Megan Taylor about a few things to consider if you're planning a late cutting.
As the days get shorter and the temperatures inevitably drop, alfalfa is beginning to go dormant. October, or Halloween hay as some people call it, will undoubtedly be high quality, but for every reward, there is a risk involved. So you'll want to be selective about which fields take a late cutting. When doing so, there are several variables to consider.
Really, those fields that have only been cut 3 times, for whatever reason, logistically, whether, you just have them set up that you're only going to cut those fields 3 times, or, it was too wet, or whatever it may have been this year. In the same vein, if you have fields that have only, if they are cut on a 30-day plus rotation, so if there's 30 days plus in between each cutting, those fields would also be good candidates. Stands that are under 3 years old, those are going to be really important. Those that have adequate soil fertility, and we're looking at a pH that's near or around 6.8. Well-drained fields where you don't have the risk of having any ponding or there's no drainage issues. Stands that have a low incidence or history of crown rot are going to be really valuable as well. And then the varieties that have been chosen in the past couple of years that have high disease tolerance and then also high winter hardiness ratings as well. Those are going to be the ones you're really going to want to key in on if you're planning on doing this late season, October, even pushing into early November hay.
There are usually 2 major logistical challenges to taking and cutting this late in the season: harvest and weather. While many producers are still in the fields harvesting other crops, it appears the weather may be more favorable than usual this year for many producers to take advantage of a late cutting.
Luckily, we have had really good weather across the state of Nebraska. We have had some pretty high winds, which is good if we are talking about making alfalfa in later October. Really, the big logistic challenge for doing this is getting it dry. We just don't have as much. We haven't traditionally had the heat. We haven't traditionally had the non-cloudy days. We just haven't had the temperatures to be able to get it very dry. But this year it's kind of looking like maybe, that's not going to hold true for us. So the biggest logistic would just be getting it dry and then getting it baled up timely. Those would be probably the 2 biggest things if you decide to do this.
When thinking of risk and reward, some risks are more manageable than others. While it may seem counterintuitive, wet hay does pose a serious fire hazard. However, this can be avoided if properly monitored.
If that material is really high moisture, when we bale it, what happens is in the center we can have heat because you're still going to be having some microbes that are going to be respiring. And so you're going to have chemical reactions going on within the bale. And as the bale heats up, it's going to heat from the inside out. And what happens is you can have fire risks associated with them. So a good rule of thumb, if you are worried about having bales that could be combustible, or if you do have to put up hay and it's a little bit wetter than you're used to, if you are going to be doing small squares, 20% moisture, you do have an added risk, and you really need to monitor those bales. For large rounds or large squares, you're looking at 16% moisture, and you really need to monitor those even if it's stored inside or outside. And you can monitor that internal temperature That's probably the best way to do it. So once you have them stacked or once you have them stored, and if you do, have bales that are starting to get internal temperatures that are above 130, that's when you really need to be concerned. And you just need to be really, really careful when you're working with hay that's wetter than you're used to, because again, you can have these fire risks.
Aside from fire risk, there are a few other possible drawbacks and logistical challenges you may want to consider when taking a late season cutting. A long winter or finite amount of sunny fall days could cause added stress to the stand, resulting in less than ideal output the following year.
I think one of the things to keep in mind is if you do decide to use alfalfa, if you do decide that you need the forage, and if you do need the forage and the stands aren't meeting these requirements, you can still do it. It's just that you may see a little bit of a delay come spring in terms of the vigor of the stand or weed pressure. And the other thing to keep in mind is that if the haying probably is just logistically not going to work out for you, or if you're trying to get around some of those drying issues, you can always use a conditioner to speed the dry down. You can always spread the windrows wider to try to get as much sunlight on them to cure them and get them dry. You could also consider using a preservative to protect the hay as well, or you could consider making haylage. Haylage for this October alfalfa can be really, really high quality, and it kind of saves you from having to get it dry. So haylage is also an option if you're thinking about taking some late season alfalfa cuttings.
While current conditions seem to be favorable for many alfalfa producers in the state to harvest deeper into the fall than usual, when choosing which fields would make suitable candidates for a late season cutting, be sure to choose wisely. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. Megan also says grazing alfalfa is an alternative to taking a late season cutting. However, she does warn that if the alfalfa is too wet, bloat could become a problem. We've posted some links where you can learn more about fall alfalfa grazing on the Market Journal website. Let's take a look at what's making news in the markets this week. The state's farmers continue harvest at a breakneck pace. Numbers from USDA report corn harvest at 58%, which is 27 points above average. Even better for soybeans, 92% is harvested versus a 58% average. North Dakota State University's Frayne Olson joined me on Wednesday morning, and I began our interview by getting an idea of how harvest is looking in his area.
Yeah, we're actually in a very similar position. Our soybean harvest is well ahead of normal pace. We're actually nearing the end of it. Corn harvest is also well ahead. We're ranked at about 55% complete. Talked to several farmers that were just thrilled that they're able to drive straight up and down the field instead of having to turn for all the low spots or slough holes or having to fight the mud and back out of being stuck. So it was actually a pleasure to be able in the field this harvest and be able to get things done.
Let's talk winter wheat now. Planting in Nebraska almost complete according to the USDA. And then add to that over 70% of the crop emerged, which is a few points off average. From the North Dakota numbers I saw, condition a little bit better, but otherwise numbers pretty similar. Any early projections for the current wheat crop?
Yeah, it's a little bit early. I guess right now what we're really looking at is that planting progress and how many acres gets actually seeded. There are some concerns about the dry soil moisture conditions. Now I know the winter wheat guys, you plant in dust and the bins will bust. So it's really all about what happens next spring and as we break dormancy in the growing conditions. So it's a little bit early to get too much of a risk premium built into the marketplace, but it's definitely something that we're watching. And a lot of it does, again, have to be with the planting progress, how many acres are seeded. The concern is, will we see, because of the drier conditions, will we see some of those drier areas flip into a corn or soybean planting next spring instead of being planted to winter wheat this fall?
And Frayne, from what I'm reading, the big story with the wheat market boils down to dry weather in the world's leading export regions. And that's raising concerns about supplies for 2021. Break down for us what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is really the bigger story, is that the southern Russia as well as Ukraine, which are really very, very large wheat producing regions, and exporting regions, are now also very, very dry. This is the driest fall conditions they've had in several years. We've got pockets in Europe. Again, Europe has a lot of winter wheat that they seed, in particular France and Germany. They're also very dry. So the concern, as I said, just like in the U.S., will those winter wheat acres get seeded? Or will some of the farmers decide, no, we're not going to, it's too risky, we're not going to plant winter wheat, we'll wait to see what happens in the spring and switch to one of the spring seeded crops. So to put that in perspective, again, the Kansas and Nebraska winter wheat crop, the hard red winter wheat, competes basically head to head with the southern Russia and Ukrainian wheat. Very similar kind of milling and baking characteristics. But right now, Russia exports about 50% more. So they have really become that dominant wheat exporter in the global market. So if there's a cutback in plantings, some private analysts are forecasting up to a 15% reduction in seeded area in Russia. That would have a significant role to play in global wheat markets, and obviously it would help us here in the States.
And what would that mean for selling strategies for farmers back here at home?
Yeah, and that's one of the things. Right now, the wheat market is kind of torn between what's happening domestically and what's happening in the corn market. So as we see corn going up, obviously the wheat market then follows fairly quickly. Right now, in my sense, the winter wheat market is really more closely tied with corn and looking for corn for direction. But as we get into spring, that's when I think the corn market and the wheat market will likely separate. And those emergence issues, as well as the rainfall during the growing season, in particular, again, not only in the U.S., but also that southern Russia and Ukrainian region is going to be watched very, very closely.
And since we're talking selling strategies, anything in particular with corn or soybeans?
Yeah, for both corn and wheat, we have quite a carry in the market. And what that's saying is that as you look in the months for delivery into the future, there's enough of a carry or an advance on that to pay for a lot of the storage costs. So what that is signaling is that the market really is trying to provide an incentive for farmers to not only sell some now today, but also prepare for storage and give you an incentive to store for delivery later in the future. The soybean market is the exact opposite. Right now we have an inverse in the soybean market, which means the prices we're getting for nearby delivery are higher than they would be in the future. So the futures market is actually discounting you if you want to put the soybeans in the bin and wait for later. If you choose to do that, what you're really doing is gambling or betting that overall prices will be higher into the future. So the futures market as well as the cash market now providing an incentive for farmers to store corn and wheat, but a real disincentive for storing soybeans.
And on the subject of corn, I understand you've been getting lots of questions regarding corn exports and the numbers that the USDA has provided. What can you tell us there?
Yeah, we've actually had a very, very strong export sales season for corn, U.S. corn into China. Right now, the USDA, not only for global exports and import-export numbers, but also for domestic corn exports, a lot of private analysts are concerned that they're underestimating or undershooting the export potential we have. And again, a lot of that is really driven by that Chinese market. So the question is, when will the USDA numbers, when will the WASDE numbers start to reflect these more aggressive sales? And I do think that will come, but historically what USDA has done is made those changes over time. They tend not to make big shifts or big adjustments in one WASDE report versus another, especially on the consumption side. On the production side, obviously a little bit different with acreages and yields, but on the consumption side, they tend to make those changes over time. So I do think those adjustments are coming. It's just going to be a little bit slower to get there.
Next week, we'll be joined by Darren Fessler of Lakefront Futures and Options. Next up, this year, impact of COVID-19 has been widespread. While the pandemic led to canceling the two biggest farm shows in the country, those being the Farm Progress Show and Husker Harvest Days, it did lead to the creation of the first Farm Progress virtual experience. As part of this virtual event, a small group of farmers from different parts of the Midwest were invited to participate in field days at both the Husker Harvest Day site near Grand Island and the Farm Progress Show site near Boone, Iowa. Read about the 5 producers who got a first-hand look at new hay and cattle handling equipment this year at the Husker Harvest Day site in the October Nebraska Farmer. Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, we've seen a mixed bag with the weather this week. We've had a little bit of something for everybody. How does the week ahead look for us?
Yes, Troy, there has been a little bit of everything this last week. We've seen temperatures up, we've seen temperatures down, we've seen a little bit of snow across central Nebraska, east central Nebraska, and the Panhandle during last weekend. And then during this week, we've seen off and on chances of moisture. And now we're going to deal with a very powerful system. Unfortunately, winter is here in earnest. And the biggest question is, how cold is it going to get, and how much snow are we going to receive, and how long is it going to last? And we'll try to answer all those questions here as we go to the upper air models and see how this next week will portend according to the GFS. As we can see from today's upper air pattern, there is a trough over the northern Rockies that is anticipated to dig deep down into the southern Rockies, and that will spread a snow band across Nebraska. At the surface, we have a low over the Texas Panhandle that's pumping that Gulf moisture up into our region. And we have the surface radar. We basically have that snow that's starting to move from Montana. That is expected to progress through the state during the overnight hours. That trough will start to dig down into the southwestern United States. Low pressure sitting there in western Texas is going to continue to move that moisture up with that very cold Arctic air coming in. We're going to see a very large band of snow develop across the state. We're most likely looking at 2 to 4 inches general coverage with some isolated 6+ inches of probably across the Panhandle. The trough gets all the way down toward the southern New Mexico. The high pressure sits over top of us. We're looking at very, very cold temperatures. And we may actually see some snow bands exiting out of southeastern Nebraska during the morning hours. By Tuesday, that trough itself starts to progress toward the east, but the big flow from the cold starts to cut it off. High pressure firmly in control over the southern plains, and low pressure at the surface is brought all the way down into southern Texas. This is one to watch for southeastern Nebraska, because right now it's lifting that system just to the south of us. But if it lifts a little bit farther north, we're going to see more accumulating snowfall, particularly Tuesday into Wednesday. But more importantly, we're going to have high pressure developing into our region. You can see the flow on the front side of that high is going to still continue to bring Canadian air into our region from the northwest as the main upper air system starts to progress across the southeast and then starts to lift up on Thursday toward the Ohio. Low pressure will keep that moisture in place in the southeast. We're going to be under the influence of high pressure, and we should start to get on the backside of that high pressure system on Thursday with a warm up in store for particularly western Nebraska, a little bit slower for eastern Nebraska. A weak wave moves through eastern Nebraska on Friday. We'll probably hold our temperatures a little bit with low pressure at the surface. There's just nothing for moisture wise to feed into this system. So most of the heavy precipitation moves to our east. And with that trough lifting out, that starts a warming trend for us. But if we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast, you'll notice below normal temperatures. That's primarily toward the end of next week as the cold air starts to shift east. Look to our west, you see above normal temperatures. Unfortunately, we don't have a precipitation chart for you, but I can say from looking at the models, it looks like we're going to see 0% for precipitation once we get past Friday in this period. And more importantly, with the winter outlook, maybe this is our first sign of winter, but certainly we're going to see some very cold temperatures down to the single digits in the Panhandle with the passage of the system, and highs basically stuck in the teens to 20s on Sunday and Monday. So Troy, it looks like snow, 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 and then we see a warming trend going into the first half of November.
Thanks, Al. Finally today, where would the ag industry be without tests to tell you what disease your plants have or what nutrients your soil is lacking? We recently went out to Ward Laboratories in Kearney to find out how they're helping producers keep their fields healthy.
So Ward Laboratories is a full-service agricultural testing lab. So what that means is we try to test anything that a farmer or rancher or homeowner would need to have analyzed. So be that soil for fertilizer recommendations or feedstuffs for nutritional supplements, or even a homeowner for water quality on their house, so if they need a water softener or if they have a nitrate problem. So anything like that someone might need tested, we try to help them with some sort of an analysis to get that taken care of.
Nick Ward, the lab's president, says that the lab was started by Ray and Jolene Ward in 1983. From their beginnings in a garage, they've grown their operation to be international.
And then they've moved to our current location in 1989. Started out with a 7,000 square foot lab there, and in 2000, and then again in 2014, 2015, we've added on, so we're at 32,000 square feet of laboratory space. We continue to grow, just serving different ag producers in the state and then throughout the country. Being here in Kearney, Nebraska, Our main customer base is the Great Plains, but as time has gone on, we've gained more reputation and we get samples worldwide now, all over the United States and from foreign countries including Spain and Ukraine, Kazakhstan. So we're kind of worldwide right here in Kearney.
To submit a sample, you simply collect the soil, mail it in, and Ward Labs will take it from there.
They would start by going around and collecting a soil sample using good practices there, and they send us their representative composite sample, and then we receive the soil, we enter it into our system and run the different tests that they require. We produce that laboratory result. We put it together in a automated report. If they have a fertilizer recommendations that they say we're trying to grow 5 tons of alfalfa a year, and we produce a report that has both the soil test as well as any fertilizer recommendations based on that. So if you're low on a specific nutrient, we then recommend that you apply X pounds of some sort of fertilizer product to help solve that problem.
On the off chance the lab doesn't have the test you need, Nick says they're always looking for ways to improve and further help the agricultural community.
We continue to try to add different services as people request it. So as demands change for new testing, we want to be able to accommodate that. So we'll try to add additional laboratory space or find the right experts that we need to have on staff to help answer those questions.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
If you need help with conducting an ag test or to find out more information, you can visit wardlab.com. That's going to do it for this week's show. Remember, if you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. And you can get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.